that the president was forced to apologise. Let's have a look at his comments at the State of the Union and the apology.
Lincoln Riley, an innocent young woman who was killed by an illegal. That's right.
You use the word illegal when talking about the man who allegedly killed Lincoln Riley.
An undocumented person. And I shouldn't have used illegal. It's undocumented.
Not content with that, Biden then launched into an astonishing series of claims and lies, firstly about Donald Trump, and then he claimed that illegal immigrants built the country.
When I spoke about the difference between Trump and me, one of the things I talked about on the border was that the way he talks about vermin, the way he talks about these people polluting the blood. I talked about what I'm not going to do, what I won't do. I'm not going to treat any of these people with disrespect. Look, they built the country.
Joining me now is the founder of Wrong Speak Publishing, Adam B. Coleman. Adam, it's incredible to watch the President of the United States just casually conflate illegal immigrants, even an alleged murderer, with legal migrants who he says built the country.
Yeah, it's very unfortunate that he does this. And while they're trying to present it as a gaffe, I think he truly believes what we all believe is that illegal, there's nothing wrong with calling a person illegal if they're here illegally. But what this is him signaling to the progressive left, who hyper focuses on language rather than the actions of heinous people. So what's more important is what they're calling the person who murdered rather than the person who was actually murdered. Their priorities are all screwed up. And this type of behavior is what leads for people like myself, who's a former Democrat, to leave the party because of this constant need to virtue signal to the far left.
I do want to speak to you about Black and Hispanic voters in particular turning away from the Democrats. But just on this particular issue, it's no wonder he is losing so many people, because it is shaping up to be the biggest issue of the coming presidential election. The illegal immigration crisis in the US, more than 7 million, well more than 7 million have come in illegally during Biden's administration. And it just seems not to be a priority. Sometimes he talks the talk, but his actions speak louder than those words.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And I personally believe that this illegal immigration situation will be the #1 issue when the election comes. Whether we realize it or not, these illegal immigrants who are coming into this country, they're going everywhere. They're not just staying in Texas, they're not just staying in border states, they're going everywhere. They're going into major cities, and how it affects Black American voters. 60% of Black Americans live in 10 states. And those states, they live within those major cities, and you can name those states by the major cities. So where are these people going? They're going to places like Chicago, like New York City. And what's happening? The resources are leaving the American citizens, including the Black citizens who live in these cities, to support people that we have no idea where they're from, why they're here, or if they're here legally, or if they're criminals or anything like that. There are no checks and balances when it comes to this stuff. And what they're essentially doing is setting up a permanent lower class of people who get to live under the radar, get supported by the system, and eventually become the next voter base.
Now, it's no wonder Biden is losing support amongst minorities, including Hispanic voters, with a recent NYT poll showing Trump has a 6-point lead with that group over Biden. The New York Times is hardly friendly to the Republicans. At the same time that Biden was apologising to Lincoln Riley's alleged killer for calling him an illegal, Donald Trump was in Georgia meeting with her grieving family and friends, and he slammed President Biden for allowing her killer into the country in the first place.
When I say he was an illegal alien, he was an illegal immigrant, he was an illegal migrant, and he shouldn't have been in our country, and he never would have been under the Trump policy.
And Adam, today we have another example of a broken system. A Honduras national who entered the US illegally is wanted for homicide in his home country, who was found guilty of felony assault with a weapon and domestic violence. Well, he was released from a Rhode Island court despite an active immigration detainer for his custody. This is just incredible, Adam. I mean, it's one thing to incentivise illegal immigration, and you could argue that is happening, but allowing accused murderers to roam free, it's a new low.
Yeah, this situation that's happening at the border is unprecedented. There is no control. No one is held accountable for the failures. You know, as it stands, you know, Joe Biden is the leader of the federal government, right? The buck stops with him. And yet now he wants to make it some sort of priority when we're getting closer and closer to the election season. But where was he for the past, you know, going on 4 years, right? When the situation was getting worse and worse. He was nowhere. Matter of fact, they basically wanted to minimize that there was no crisis at the border. They only wanted to acknowledge that there is a crisis once those border states started sending these people to all different types of cities across the country. Then it became everybody's problem, right? And that's the comfort of not living in a border state, right? You get to be a sanctuary city when you're actually living sanctuary-like living, right? You're far away from the problem. It's easy to say, oh, yes, bring them in when you don't have to deal with these people, when you don't have to manage the situation, and when they don't take your resources. But what's happening? Even Democrat mayors are going to the Biden administration saying, do something, and they're being disappointed when they're not there to support them.
Now, switching to a different issue, in Canada, a documentary produced by Radio Canada has exposed just how quickly young, vulnerable children are being pushed into life-changing hormone treatments and gender reassignment surgeries. The French-speaking documentary followed a 14-year-old girl at her first appointment. This is her first appointment at a private clinic in Quebec. She was given a testosterone prescription and even asked about possible surgeries just 9 minutes into her appointment. Again, Adam, this is incredible. This is a trend we have seen in the West, in North America, parts of Europe, right here in Australia. And we are slowly getting some clarity around the medical practices in this field.
Yeah, what's happening to these children who are confused, who might be experiencing dysphoria, or who are maybe just being caught up in a trend? What's happening to them is that the adults in the room are failing them, right? The adults are treating the children like adults. And as soon as they have a whimsical idea of what they want to become, they just go along with it. There are no hurdles for these young people, right? They have people who are enabling them. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing enablers who are ultimately benefiting the medical industry. We're seeing them benefit big pharma, right? Where do you think these products are made? Or look at all these surgeons who are cutting the breasts off of young girls, of young, healthy girls, right? Who makes money off of that? And just like, you know, any other major issue like foreign wars, always follow the money. And the money always leads to the medical industry, right? But at the end, these kids are left tormented. They're left unresolved. And that's when suicidality actually occurs.
Well, there's all sorts of data being released. Michael Schellenberger is doing incredible work uncovering some of the practices in this field, and it is frankly frightening. I think it's one of the biggest medical scandals of our time. Now, finally, on your Wrong Speak publishing website, you've published articles exploring how Black voters are often portrayed as Democrats who can forget this from Biden.
But I tell you, if you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, then you ain't black.
But you say Black voters are actually more likely to be conservative at heart, even if they don't vote that way. This year, the polls are showing that Joe Biden and the Democrats are not getting the enthusiasm they expected from Black voters. This is something you anticipated would happen last month, describing the Biden administration as treating Black and Hispanic voters like a spouse they are cheating on. assuring them they care about them while spending lavishly on their new love. I love that analogy. And that new love in this case is illegal migrants. Tell me about that phenomenon, because we talked about Hispanic voters switching to Trump. Trump's winning unprecedented support from that group compared to previous Republicans. But black voters have been such a solid voting bloc for the Democrats for a long time. Something like 90% vote for the Democrats.
Yeah, this actually has more to do with demographics, locations, and which political party fights for these particular locations. So, throughout the United States, you look at, every 4 years when the presidential race happens, you see them count all these rural areas, they show up red, and then what happens? They count these blue cities, and they lose the state. Why? Because majority of the people live in these states, live in the cities. Well, this also counts for Black Americans. And what ends up happening is the Republicans aren't necessarily fighting for the vote within these cities. So it's actually an unreasonable ask to say, hey, I know we don't show up locally and we have nobody that runs in your locality, and we haven't been there for decades, but vote for us in the national election, right? It's an unreasonable ask. And so what ends up happening is that everyone presumes that Black Americans are just in love with the Democrats, rather than it being that they're the only choice, right? You can't vote for a party that isn't on the ballot. And from time after time, whether it be major cities, small cities in these states, you can look, Democrats run unopposed. And the choice is, do you want a blue dog moderate Democrat, or do you want a communist?
Adam B. Coleman, always a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you so much for your time this evening.
Thank you.